Welcome, everyone. I've been asked to introduce Ronnie Green. Ronnie has had, for those of you who don't know Ronnie has had a varied career in university and in industry. And notably, he was national program leader many years ago and was co-leader on the original effort to develop the genome blueprint. So he's now the chancellor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and he's graciously agreed to connect with us over the internet. And I don't want to take any more of his time, so I will turn it over to Ronnie Green.
So first of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to be asked to kind of kick off your session on developing a new blueprint for animal genomics. As Adele said in her introductory remarks, it's hard to envision now in 2017, almost back to what we were thinking in 2004, and what it was like at that point in time when we first started down the road to develop the current blueprint that has just been kind of finished up in this last 10 years. So I want to take you back a little bit in that history and remind all of us, many of you who are there, that as I've looked at the invitation list, were involved in that process at that point in time more than 10 years ago, and just remind us of kind of where we were then and what led to the blueprint that has been in place this last 10 years. So if you remember back to 04, so now 13 years ago, that was the time period when we were fortunate enough to be coming off of the sequencing of the first draft of the human genome just a few years before, and there was tremendous opportunity for the development of resources and infrastructure around genomics to be applied to animals, and specifically to livestock and aquaculture, for genetic improvement, long-term genetic improvement. And when I got to ARS, which would have been in early 2003, there already were well-developed plans that had come out of a whole series of workshops. And if you go and read the blueprint that we have had in place, it refers to the Allerton conferences. It refers to the National Academy Workshop in 2002. It refers to the Interagency Working Group on Domestic Animal Genomics that formed out of that Horizons Workshop in 2002 to coordinate efforts across all of the government agencies related to animal genomics. And then we were at the point in 2004 when the chicken genome was being finished, the beef genome the cattle genome was being started. We had pulled together the resources the year before, and we were deep into the beginning of that process of sequencing for the bovine project. There was discussion out there about the same in the porcine arena. There was very early stage discussion about what would happen in sheep. There was discussion in the horse on the equine genome. The honeybee genome was well underway in sequencing at that time. And it just seemed to us that given that those resources were being put in place and we were partnering with NHGRI to make that happen, as well as partners around the world, that we really needed to have a strategy and a long-term outlook for how to make use of those resources, how to marshal the scientific community around them to make long-term progress in animal genomics. So how this came about, in all candor, was in a meeting of the Interagency Working Group on Domestic Animal Genomics in early 2004. The discussion amongst that group, which included representation from NIH through NHGRI, Gene Peterson at the time, USAID, Rob Bertram, NSF, Monty Dilworth, and Kathy Olsen were involved. Through FDA, Bernadette Dunham, I think, was involved at that time, ARS and NIFA, represented by by Muquarrab and myself, as well as DOE. We're all at that table talking about how do we make use of that infrastructure resource we were working so hard to bring about. And they directed through that interagency working group for Muquarrab and I to lead a discussion toward developing for lack of a better term, strategic plan for how we should approach animal genomics over the ensuing time period. So that was the genesis, if you will, of what eventually became the blueprint. We went through a workshop similar to what you're doing there at the National Ag Lab today and tomorrow to discuss the planks that should be in that, building upon all of those previous discussions that had occurred, Allerton 1, 2, 3, the Horizons workshop, as I mentioned earlier, that gave a lot of the background information that was assimilated into the blueprint. And then that workshop really laid the foundational planks for what led to the blueprint later on. We then also had opportunity in 06, if I'm remembering correct, in 2006, for redevelopment of the National Program Plan for Animal Production, where I was leading that effort at ARS at the time. Deb Hammernick and Peter and others were involved from NIFA. And through that national stakeholder workshop in 06, we also accumulated further input around animal genomics and animal genetics and how we can move forward in that arena that became additionally part of that discussion that led into the blueprint. And then lastly, in 07, we also were part of a EU-US biotechnology workshop that John Claxton and his colleagues helped us do in Brussels. And a number of you, I think, who are there today were involved in that workshop that additionally added to the transnational components of the way the blueprint was ultimately developed. So that history led to the document that you are starting with as a seminal document for the blueprint. So the 08 to 17 document came out of that process. We were quite proud of it when it was developed. I have to kind of laugh. I went back and pulled it out to reread it myself here the last couple of weeks. It's been, in all honesty, it's been a while since I read it. And I recall how much effort went into, you're going to think this is as funny as I probably thought it was when I looked at it. But the cover, the DNA helix, kind of graphic with the 3 planks of science to practice and the various tactical areas under those and discovery science and infrastructure, the same that you're starting from today in the new discussion. We went through quite a process at that time in 04 to come up with that really pretty graphic that had all of the species on it intertwined with DNA, and we were so proud of that result. When we were done, we patted ourselves on the back, I think, for a month about that graphic and how pretty it was. But what I was most proud of is what's in the document. And when I reread it here in the last few days, how many of those things have been accomplished or deeply furthered beyond where we were when the document was completed in 07. And the capitalization on those resources that were in place at that time or came into place through the remainder of the genomes over the ensuing years as part of that decade. So quite proud of the document, quite proud of the fact that the accomplishments that the scientific community has made to move forward in these arenas, and proud of you, Caird, and Jeff and Adele and your colleagues for reigniting this discussion about what the next decade needs to look like to continue to make progress in this important arena. So sorry we couldn't connect by video, but hopefully that you could hear that, Caird and Jeff, and it gives you some good background as you go to work today and tomorrow to develop the next blueprint.
Okay. Thank you, Ronnie. Dr. Green, do you have time for a quick question? Or? Ronnie, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Do you have time for a question?
Yeah, you bet.
Do we have any questions? So the first question I had, looking forward, what are the things that you would consider would be important to the next generation of the blueprint?
Well, I looked through your outline that you had proposed going into the workshop, and it certainly looks familiar. There's a lot of the planks look very similar to what we had in the previous document. But the unraveling of these genic effects and understanding them for very difficult and intractable traits remains to be the challenge, the big challenge to me. The huge improvements and progress that have been made in whole genome selection. If you look in that science to practice side, what popped out to me was the tremendous progress that's been made in that arena alone. Warrants to me the investments that were made in the infrastructure, that I talked about from the previous decade. But this unraveling of these very difficult traits through genic effects and understanding of those genic effects, certainly the new technologies were so far advanced beyond where we were 10 years ago. In the infrastructure that we have to utilize, I'm not involved in that daily, but it's obvious the improvements that have been made that should enhance our progress. But I would still point to these difficult traits being the important focus.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Ronnie, we very much appreciate your connecting with us this morning and telling us about your efforts with the blueprint.
Well, I'll have to admit, I'd much rather be there with you than I would be dealing with some of the things I deal with in my current job. And I'll leave it at that.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.